I want to open, just to frame my talk, which is called When the Delinquents Strike Back, with a quote from an artist named Leon Battista Alberti when he was teaching at the Institute of Design in the 1440s here. You will marvel at many jokes. How many jokes and laughter can accompany such serious and weighty matters? Alberti teaching at the Institute of Design in the 1440s here? Oh, guys. Okay, I got to work harder, apparently. Paul Richards' review of the 1969 Harry Hu exhibition at the Corcoran Museum of Art's DuPont Center in Washington, D.C., opens with an extraordinary hagiography. And I'm quoting, "On April 14th, 1954, the Cubs opened their season by playing the New York Giants at Chicago's Wrigley Field. The game was the occasion of a peculiar coincidence. Carl Worsam, a blonde teenager, was inside the park selling popcorn to the fans. Art Green, a sign painter finishing a billboard on nearby Sheffield Street, found his concentration shattered by the sporadic roaring of the crowd. Outside the park, Jim Falconer was selling programs. Sue Ellen Roca, then 11, was sitting inside the company of her father, watching her first professional baseball game. Gladys Nilsson stared at the stadium from the window of the L that was carrying her home from school. Then Hank Soar hit a home run, and Jim Nutt, sitting in the stands, caught it." It's a great story, but the Cubs didn't play on April 14th of that year, and their home opener took place the following day, and they lost because, you know, that's what the Cubs do, 11-5 to the Cincinnati Redlegs. Soar did hit a home run in the game. He had a 3-run homer against the White Sox, unfortunately, on April 11th in preseason play. But Richard got this tidbit from the artists themselves. Its basic building blocks are to be found in the printed material that accompanied the Corcoran exhibition, not the catalog, but something else. One item on this piece of ephemera taunts the reader by treating the pamphlet in hand like a baseball program. "You can't tell a player without the scorecard," it says, and refers to Don Baum as their skipper. The baseball park chain of events revealed itself exactly, almost to the day, 12 years later, at the founding of the group. None of the Harry Hu disputes the mystical significance of the coinciding events that day in 1954. Jim Nutt goes as far as to say, quote, "It explains a lot." Of course, it explains absolutely nothing because it makes no sense, but it has this kind of quality of creating a hagiography and a sort of mystical idea that this group had to be together. They're all connected, interconnected in some way. And I want to just use that as a way of talking about my topic, which is how artists in this time, in the 1960s, there's of course precedent for this, self-consciously used their roles, their persona, and the art that they made in order to play around with the art world conventions that existed up till that time, to turn it on their heads, and to create new meaning out of that, and also expand the possibilities that existed for artists to enter in a kind of dialogue and critique with the art world. And I think that the Harry Hu, even if they were simply having fun, they actually very intelligently contributed to that sort of shift in culture in which artists were striking back to some extent, and not necessarily in a malicious way, although I will show you examples in which that is happening, but in a way that is poking fun at the art world taking itself way too seriously. And I want to open by also revisiting the Harry Hu's early criticism. In those first few exhibitions that happened at the Hyde Park Art Center and also at the Corcoran Museum DuPont Center exhibition site, in the exhibition that was organized by Walter Hopps, to revisit that criticism is to revisit an extraordinary amount of bafflement by critics here in Chicago and in other places, but mostly here in Chicago, wondering whether or not these people are serious or not, and wondering what degree to go along with what's being shown as a serious kind of new imagery, or if there are jokes, and not to be taken too far into the jokes to show that they can be taken in, but to balance this, walk a kind of balance between wanting to critique them in a serious way as art critics, but also wanting to show that they're in on the jokes, but they're clearly not sure whether they should be in on the jokes. So I'll give you a few examples of this. One of my favorites is David Katzev, who wrote a review of the 1967 show that didn't have Jim Falconer in it at the Hyde Park Arts Center, the second show. And this is from his review, which goes, quote, "Creme de la flemme, Harry Who Too. The current exhibition has all the appeal of half-chewed food combined with a wet sneeze, cold, lumpy oatmeal, and the memorable feeling of resting your hand on somebody's recently discarded chewing gum. The success with which these artists communicate disgust, revulsion, or absurdity, however, is not to be denied." And he's referring to the fact that many of the artists represented in that group won major awards at the 1967 Chicago and Vicinity Show at the Art Institute, including Gladys, who got the top prize. So there's a recognition that they are winning official recognition and acceptance by the art world at the time for their efforts, which are very serious, of course. But there's also an acknowledgement that there's a lot of base imagery here, and there's an ambivalence and anxiety about what that really means and what that means for the viewer's experience. And a lot of the reviewers, including Franz Scholz famously, try to write these sorts of streams of analogs and words for the feeling that they seem to be getting or think they're supposed to be getting from the work. So, for instance, Scholz goes on about how there's a whole sort of strain of things that he sees coming out of their work, including memories of baseball trading cards, bubblegum orgies, the secret sight of one parent's armpits and underwear up close, one's own mucus, tire pumps lying out in the rain in the backyard, broken balloons, misspelled words scrawled out on the walls under railroad viaducts, the drawings found in the margins of elementary school textbooks. And so he's clearly having a visceral reaction to this work, and he's also, I think, acknowledging a recent, very well-known statement by Claes Oldenburg, in which he talks about what he is in art for, the kind of art that he feels is relevant at that moment, that really is only published very recently before that, in which it's this stream of consciousness series of amazing images that are all really tied to the bodily functions and accidents that you witness in the street. So this is the kind of culture of reaction that's being forced by this work. This is just the cover of the catalog for that Corcoran show. And I want to also sympathize a little bit with these critics, because you'll see, as I contextualize this work, the kind of stuff that they're in, the context in which they're encountering work like Wiggly Woman from 1966, or takeaways like this Perspiration W, get great glads, play with the Perspire. It's a sweat sack that you can give to your kids, and they can play with the dried up crust of sweat that's inside here. Isn't that fun? And so this is the kind of stuff that they're encountering, and they have to come up with a new kind of critical language and context for describing it. So of course it's shocking, but I also want to demonstrate that there's another context that this is coming out of. So this is a centerfold from the second catalog that Jim does of this woman who's, if you think she's sick, her boyfriend is sick. So who knows if that's why she's that way. And the other thing about them that a lot of people noticed at the time is that they were very, very much complicit and in control of controlling a kind of public persona and all of the different parts around their exhibitions, which is one of the things that is still, I think, most influential on contemporary artists working today, a younger generation, but also one of the most impressive things about how they seem to come out of the blue from their student work as a professional group with a kind of identity that coalesces around individuals working together for a particular a group show. And Franz Scholz, for instance, actually says, quote, "The image they project publicly in 1967, this is when he's writing, is one of cool, knowing ease, topped off with a nutty sense of humor. They are cunning promoters of themselves and have a gift for making memorable remarks to the press." So these aren't simply kids who are just kind of doing things where, you know, they're putting together interesting, sometimes wacky, over-the-top images. They're also managing how they're talking about the work. And, of course, the ephemera, which, of course, we prize now that they produced around the work, like the comic books and the other takeaways, is all part of that, that sort of plan. So in Chicago, I have a suspicion that along with them, there are other people who are looking at the way criticism is being written, and they're making their own sort of comments in their work. Art Green said to me that he thinks that this Ray Yoshida painting from 1970 may be an oblique reference to the kinds of criticism that's being produced at the time that he doesn't like, so it's superficial concerns. There's some suggestion of violence. This may be a pun on small potatoes. I don't know, that people are nitpicking particular things. And the kind of work that's being done in Chicago in relation to other kinds of popular culture imagery in fine art, like this Ed Paschke painting using Mighty Mouse, this wrestler hermaphrodite image, I think you constantly have to sort of look at the way that this is being taken in relationship to Roy Lichtenstein and others. There's a common source material, but of course, as Lynn pointed out, there's a spin to it that is much more, I think, complex in terms of gender issues, and in terms of sexuality, in terms of politics often, though there is that, I think, even in some of the best-known pop stuff from the West and East Coasts. And so how markedly different the use of this kind of imagery is because of a point of view and an interest. And so I'll talk about many people in Chicago, but I want to talk about what else is happening. And we'll drag in Peter Saul, not kicking and screaming, because he really likes this sort of stuff, but also Bruce Conner and others who are playing around with this image of the artist at this time and show you what they're reacting to. In Peter's case, throughout his career, he is constantly obsessing over whether he is making the right kind of art. And I think the ultimate irony is that he is now showing with Mary Boone, which is the gallery that had a lot of the art stars he used to ridicule and satirize and viciously rip apart all the time. So who knows what that's about? It's only Peter's psych. Hi, Peter, you out there? So let's go back to the late 19th century. So artists playing around with the art world and lobbying their sort of attacks and critiquing the way that people are seeing artists is very popular as artists in America are thinking about the rise of exhibitions, the kinds of juries that gather around exhibitions, peers reviewing things, and there's lots of examples of cartoons that pop up in different kinds of periodicals, but also artwork and private artwork that happens where artists are ruminating on the role of the artists in society and the way they're treated even within the small subculture of the art world. So this is, if for art historians out there, maybe Wendy Greenhouse might be the only one where this is relevant to her life, but who have heard of the Cresson Award, which was a very important travel grant that came out of the Pennsylvania Academy. It's named for this guy, William Emlyn Cresson, who died at the age of 25, but we have some sketchbooks by him that he did in the 1860s. This is from 1864-65. And it's scenes from studio life, basically, and also pictures at an exhibition. 2 sketchbooks where he's hand-drawing in ink his perceptions. He's really young. He's actually about 21 when he's doing these. But already, this is his takeaway from what the art world is like. This is a scene from an annual exhibition at the Pennsylvania Academy, and it says, "Lady, oh, do look here, Augustus. What a great big wretched daub." And she's talking about the painting that's on the wall there. "I wonder why they admitted such a beginner. N.B. Nota bene, this is Augustus's own pet picture." So that's the artist, and he does not want to admit it, and he's horrified by her opinion of it. And then you have a critic, and this is a studio image where he said immortality up here. Intelligent art critic. "It's a melancholy fact that you artists are only appreciated after you're dead." And then the sculptor, Bailey. In that, there's a close similarity between Hoggs and gentlemen of our profession. Intelligent art critic collapses. So this is already sort of in American culture, and there's some concrete examples in which artists are going at critics because of things they've said in their work. So a good example locally is Messina Barton, who was an exhibiting artist in Chicago, very influential, I think, did a series of aura portraits in the 1930s. This is one of C.J. Bulliett, an important critic here, who wrote for the Chicago Daily News and was syndicated. So he actually was a correspondent for the New York Times. So New Yorkers in the 30s and the 40s knew what was going on in Chicago because he was actually writing about it. And then this is from 1932, I think, and this is a 1936 painting that is largely considered an autobiographical painting to the extent that it is Barton reacting to something that Bulliett said about women artists in a book that he published, basically saying that there have been no works of genius that have come out of women artists because they are simply not capable of doing it because of their biology, is in a nutshell what he said. And so this is Barton's reaction, this huge, grand style, 6-foot-high painting that has Salome with the head of John the Baptist, but that's actually Bulliett's head. So that was her response as a work of labor to make this crafted picture, but also her kind of nudge at him that you should watch what you're looking at. And of course, you'll see that Peter Saul takes this on as well in almost the same kind of way. There's other famous examples. For instance, when Grant Wood made the memorial windows in Iowa to past dead soldiers from American wars going to back to the Revolutionary War, but thinking about World War I in the immediate past, he was criticized by the Daughters of the American Revolution because he had the stained glass windows fabricated by master stained glass window makers in Germany. The enemy, how could you possibly do that? And so he was criticized by them, and his response was this painting, Daughters of the American Revolution, that shows these fine women tracing their lineage back to the Revolution, of course. They're pure Americans, giving them a claw-like hand. But what's behind them is what's installed proudly in their actual meeting place, which is a print of Emanuel Leutze's Washington Crossing the Delaware, which was made by a German-born artist in the 19th century in Dusseldorf. So, so that's his getting back at them. John Stewart Curry is lampooned by the Wisconsin-based artist Marshall Glazier. This is John Stewart Curry with the Wisconsin bull breeding machine. He's drawing on two popular images of Curry, one during exhibitions in a rural art exhibition, and then him joking with overalls on. He can't make heads or tails of this. He wants to paint livestock. He has no idea what the heck this thing is. Aaron Borod, who was really, really angry and felt like he had been deliberately marginalized by the art world after 1950 because of the rise of abstract expressionism. In a 1952 catalog, this is the cover spread out, made a deliberate parody of a Pollock painting and writes in his statement about how this is his easy basically recreation of something that's really fun and decorative, but it's not a serious work. But of course, anybody can do this, is Borod's attitude. The irony for me is that Borod's still life paintings, which is what he occupies himself with from 1953 to the rest of his life, often employ, to me, the space of post-war American painting. They're very shallow, they're very surface-oriented, and there's a lot of correspondence here. When Alice Neal is asked to paint a picture of Clement Greenberg's daughter in 1967, I think she winds up doing some of the washiest soaked-in paint, a color field kind of thing. In the background here, this is Greenberg looking at one of his favorite paintings. As a kind of jab to Greenberg, this is resolved. It's one of the strangest paintings I think Alice Neal ever did. It's in our collection. But there's this kind of creeping sort of framework around here that is playing around with the kind of conventions of what Greenberg would have liked. So then Art News from, I guess it's from about 1949 or so to 1966, does this great series of profiles that is coinciding with the rise of the art star and the media-made art star, and actually is complicit in this or helps this along, which is a series of articles called So-and-So, so somebody's name, insert name of artist, paints a picture or makes a sculpture. And it's an attempt to bring you into the artist's studio in order to see the act of creation laid bare, absolute transparency. You can see genius at work or labor at work or whatever you want to see, and you get these intimate portrayals of artists doing their thing. One of the funniest ones to me is that Ivan Albright is profiled in 1950 while he's making this. And the point of the article, the hope was that during the course of the article you see this thing being made from start to finish, so you see the process. But of course, Albright started this painting in 1943 and won't finish it until 1963. So you just get a charcoal drawing. But then there are people like Jackson Pollock who are part of this profile. This is Pollock's profile that happens in May of 1951. And often other artists would actually be the people who are writing the text for this. In Pollock's case, it's Robert Goodnow who writes the text. And just to give you a sense of what this is like, this is just the beginning paragraph of the article Pollock Paints a Picture. Far out on Long Island in the tiny village of Springs, with the ocean as background, and and in close contact with the open, tree-studded fields where cattle graze peacefully, Jackson Pollock lives and paints. With the help of his wife, Lee Krasner, former Hoffman student and an established painter in her own right, good going, Robert, for actually putting that in there, good now, he has remodeled a house purchased there to fit the needs of the way of life they have chosen. And a short distance away is a barn, which has been converted into a studio. It is here that Pollock is engrossed in the strenuous job of creating his unique world as a painter. So this is the kind of thing that you would be getting in these art news profiles, and they really are illuminating. I think art historians get a lot out of them because they're a snapshot of that moment. It's an interesting way of seeing how people are talking about artists. But one of the best parodies of this is Bruce Conner's 1967 profile of himself called Bruce Conner Makes a Sandwich that was actually written in 1965 and submitted to Art News, the place that is publishing the stuff, and they don't publish, they reject it. And so Bruce Conner publishes it in Art Forum in 1967. So Bruce Conner actually writes the text for this. He has written it. And his friend, Tom Garver, who used to be the director of the Madison Arts Center and is an active critic and curator in Madison, Wisconsin, took the photographs, and it's his byline that appears there to give the air of an expert reporting on what Bruce Conner is doing. And what Bruce Conner is doing is he's making a sandwich. But it's not just any sandwich. It's a bacon, cheese, banana, lettuce, Miracle Whip, peanut butter, and butter sandwich. And what you have, so this is how this begins. So Bruce Conner's paid very close attention to the cadence and the structure and the kinds of information that are in these art news articles. It starts off, the artist's kitchen is on the 3rd floor of a Brookline, Massachusetts apartment house. The room has a north window and a west window, a north door to the porch and an east door to the hallway, and a south door to a small pantry passageway. There are yellow and white cotton curtains in the doorways. There is a closet with a cupboard in it. Yellow walls, white woodwork, white and silver linoleum floor, cardboard box on the floor, a yellow wastebasket, a round wooden table, red roses on the table, a white chair with a pink, blue, and white wood pillow, a stool with a yellow butterfly print checkered pillow, a mahogany chair and a telephone directory, and a Sears Roebuck catalog, an aluminum painted radiator, a metal pan with 5 potted plants is on the radiator, a Frigidaire, a sink, a gas stove, an electric toaster, a cherry oak cream cheese pie collage, a flower painting and a wreath painting by Gene Conner are on the wall. So his wife, too, is an artist. So then it sort of reports who's in the room. But one of the funniest things, I think, is not only the pictures, which Tom Garver is clicking with. He clicks a stopwatch. And so what you have here are these entries that document exactly what's happening in the creative process. So 11:26, 11, so it's 11 o'clock. So at 26 minutes and 30 seconds, kitchen and table are photographed. 26:30, same. And so you're getting like every one of these things. So bacon, 4 slices, matchless brand bacon, buy low discount price, 53 cents, 1 pound net weight, keep refrigerated before opening. So he's also documenting the process and the materials. So materials, obsessing over the materials was a really important part of the Art News article. So Connor is also nailing that and making fun of that. The finished product is this utterly inedible, disgusting sandwich that includes, as I said, Miracle Whip and bacon and bananas. And you don't actually see him eating it because that's not the point. He's making it, and now you can marvel at its awesomeness. So that is one sort of manifestation of this kind of reaction to what is happening in the art world around the creation and aura around art world stars. And this is where our friends, the Harry Who, and other people start to sort of fall in and arise out of this context. Another is the sort of series of Americans shows at the Museum of Modern Art done by Dorothy Miller. A lot of people regard these as some of the most innovative exhibitions of contemporary art that were happening in series. And the one that happened in 1959, 16 Americans, Frank Stella tries to sort of disrupt what's happening in those catalogs, which are that you get statements by the artists about what they're doing with their work. Instead, he has Carl Andre write the statement for him, and he appears with one of his striped paintings in a pinstripe suit. This is not meant to be funny. This is meant to be serious, I believe. And so all you have here is an assertion by Andre on Frank Stella's behalf that it's prefaced to stripe painting. Art excludes the unnecessary. Frank Stella has found it necessary to paint stripes. There is nothing else in his painting, and sort of goes on. So here's a close-up of that. So there's of course, there's a lot of ways one could go in trying to dismantle that sort of attitude that arises about this serious and hermetic object in the art world at the opening of the 1960s, where there are many parallel competing issues in the art world. And one could, show examples of the pop artists. Here's Claes Oldenburg in 1962 in London going to work. And here is Roy Lichtenstein admitting that he may be also a screened image himself. Here is Andy Warhol, who is a master of this kind of public persona and crafting what he is going to be to the public. And so here he is with the Velvet Underground. He's hanging out with the hip, even though he's cool. And that's in 1965. Here he is in his factory. So you know that he isn't, he's actually doing a lot of work. He's not fooling around. He's serious as much as he is somebody who is involved in what's the sort of underside of culture at the time, too. Then you get people placing ads in Art Forum that are deliberately fooling around with this. This is Ed Ruscha's ad that was published in Art Forum for an exhibition. That's Ed Ruscha in bed with those women. I don't know who the women are. Sometimes they're actually labeled in some of these photographs, like Bruce Conner. There's pictures of Bruce Conner with Tony Basil and a young Terry Garr in some of his photographs, like his ads for Bruce Conner's physical services and things like that. But here's Ed Ruscha. Ed Ruscha says goodbye to college joys. Judy Chicago publishes, so that was from Art Forum in January of 1967. In Art Forum in December of 1970, Judy Chicago, recently christened Judy Chicago, and an advertisement for her solo show at Cal State in Fullerton is here with boxing gloves. Perhaps that's her real manager, and is going to take no prisoners whatsoever. She means business. That's the sort of persona that she is playing on and presenting. Playing around with gender roles right before the rise of the women's art movement that gets off the ground around that time. And then a very famous exchange between Linda Benglis and Robert Morris happens just a few years later. Linda Benglis is making work like this around that time. This is 1970s for Carl Andre, and contrasting radically with a piece like Voice from 1974, by Robert Morris. The two of them did collaborate on different kinds of imagery together that they produced for ads, not ads, but actually invitations for their exhibitions. And there was a kind of exchange back and forth between the two of them. They were friends. But the camp that was talking about Morris's work in the context of a kind of hardcore, specific, canonical minimalism was rejecting what Linda Benglis was doing, even though Benglis and Eva Hesse and other artists who were working with the same kinds of materials and thinking about structure in series were not really admitted to this because of their connection still to a kind of bodily imagery, I think, and also a messiness and a sort of attitude away from a machine aesthetic. So Robert Morris makes this poster. This poster, the photograph of this poster is actually taken by Rosalind Krauss, who's somebody who will not write about Linda Benglis at this time, and is actually later totally horrified at the kinds of things Benglis is doing. This is an ad for his 1974 solo exhibition in which that piece that I just showed you appears. And he is here in S&M garb, chains, nude, possibly all the way, but he's just shown from the waist up with this German helmet. So there are all sorts of very upsetting and counterculture, but also historical references here that relate to violence and to fetishization and horror, and all sorts of bizarre references that seem to contrast with the content of his work and the exhibitions. And so this poster is something that he produces, and in addition, and it's pretty large, and one of Benglis's responses to that and other things in the culture at the time, I hope there's a disclaimer on the stream about naughty bits, but anyway, you're seeing it now, is this ad that she places in Art Forum in November of 1974. And so this is how it kind of culminates. And so Linda Benglis first conceives this as an independent work, and then she learns that somebody is writing, Robert Pincus Witten is actually writing a critical piece in Art Forum about her work. And so Art Forum asks her, do you want to put this in the context of that article? And she does not want to. And so then it is suggested that she buy ad space. And she buys ad space. And so where that actually appears is there's the cover of Art Forum, which is paginated, page 1. You open the first 2 pages. It's the 4th and 5th page that you actually see. So it's right there, double page spread. The whole design is hers. And up here in the corner, what you have is basically her gallery name, Linda Benglis, and then copyright the person who took the photograph. And so while this has been taken as a serious kind of assault on gender politics and a kind of boys' club and masculinity in the art world at that time, you saw the Ed Ruscha image, for instance, and also that Robert Morris image, I can't help but think of this as a kind of also supposed to be funny and burlesque. Come on, art world, what do you think you're doing? Take yourself so seriously. Contrasting with this kind of thing, this could not be more sort of opposite and extreme in the other direction. And I want to actually quote what Linda Benglis says about it because it's really important. She says, I appreciated the revered attitude of the women's movement and the seriousness, but I also wanted more playfulness, so I got involved with presenting myself in photo roles. What interested me about the feminist movement was the fact that there really is an emphasis on the taboo. A lot of the highly feminized imagery, laced, stuffed, lipsticked, and tamponed, had not been regarded in the context of art. This iconography was coming directly out of the feminist movement. It's often difficult to say if an image is masculine or feminine. The feminists decided to make themselves explicit. My aim was to present artwork that questioned all extremes by being extreme or outrageous. I felt that placing the gallery's name on the work strengthened the statement, thereby mocking the commercial impact aspect of the ad, the art star system, and the way artists use themselves, their persona, to sell the work. It was mocking sexuality, masochism, and feminism. The context of the placement of the ad in an art magazine was important. So there's a lot of fallout regarding this, including a mass sort of letter from some of the contributing writers and editors to Art Forum, Lawrence Alloway, Max Kozloff, Rosalind Krauss, Annette Michelson, who protest this and say it's a qualitative leap in vulgarity in the art world. How dare Art Forum publish this? It's a mocking of the women's movement, and they see Art Forum as commercially complicit with an artist doing this kind of base non-art in the context of the art magazine. And these writers actually don't really walk away all the way. They continue to write, but they have this letter to the editor that is published not too long after that. One of the funnier letters to the editor is from Peter Plagens, who makes a kind of parody letter to the editor, knowing that his colleagues are going to do this. And I'll just read a little bit of that. He says, to the editor, this is published in the same letter to the editor column that the one where Alloway, Kozloff, Cross, and others basically show their horror and resentment. He says, I am shocked that for some years now, I have depended on Art Forum as a consistently, patently inoffensive family reading, a publication filled only with photographs of minimal, process or conceptual art devoid of even a trace of sensuality, which I could place on my coffee table next to Reader's Digest, Family Circle, and Art and Language, and have it blend in nicely. Frankly, I never thought I'd see the day when I would have to keep it out of the reach of my children. Your November issue, with that color photograph of some shameless hussy showing everything from here to Bakersfield, is disgusting. Imagine my perplexity when my 9-year-old son, who'd met this artist only weeks before here in our home, asked me if that dildo was really made of some Japanese plastic, which would further depress the situation in our domestic styrene industry. What could I say? I gave him the best evasive fatherly answer I could and assured him that Robert Morris owned controlling interest in the company. So this is all like kind of jab on Art Forum preferencing minimalism at the same time in these kinds of materials. And imagine my chagrin when my wife, looking up momentarily from her copy of Screw, asked me if she couldn't trade me and 4 box boys for that thing. Our household is now in a shambles, and my students hound me with queries on the myth of the vaginal orgasm. If your publication cannot return to its former dignity, I suggest covering the offensive anatomy with a small Don Judd inset, and then cancel my subscription immediately. And it's signed, yours for a cleaner Soho, Peter Plagens. So, while there's nothing explicit in this photograph of marriage Chicago style, I can't help but think that this is arising, these kinds of, these playing around with what you expect of an artist is arising out of the same culture that is really going around the entire United States and in the art world. So you have here artists who, instead of being serious workers, are attending the opening. First of all, were they really married? And are they going to be married? And there was, from reports in the history of the Hyde Park Art Center, an actual marriage ceremony. Barbara, I don't know, are you married now? I don't think so. Sue Ellen. So this is Carl and Barbara Rossi, Sarah Canwright, Sue Ellen Roca, Ed Flood, and Ed Paschke. And they're wearing ice skates, which is not exactly the most efficient thing to wear to an art opening, let alone the get-ups. Art Green sent me this. I don't know what this is. Maybe somebody who's part of it knows exactly what this is, but I think this is a fascinating example of a kind of handmade mock advertisement for rent an artist, price smash. Chicago-type artists available for your next party or gallery opening, real cheap. This is all done by you, Sue Ellen, isn't it? Sue Ellen in art? No? No, who is it?
I'll tell you later.
Okay. You tell me later. All new and original costumes and performances, unconditionally guaranteed to warm the hearts of any Chicagoan. And the names of the exhibitors, who are the people who are associated with this, are all Chicago marriage style folks, right? So we have Canwright, Wirsum, Paschke, and Roca. So fascinating. It's satirical. It's not done by any of them. Oh, fascinating. That's even better. And then Art told me in 1973 he made this this advertisement for his, or show card for his first real one-person show in 1973 at the Owens Art Gallery in New Brunswick, as a deliberate response to the conceptual artists on his faculty in Nova Scotia. So this is a photograph he found at Maxwell Street in a bin of photographs of cake decorators. These are all cake decorators. And this is the one he identified with. So that's supposed to be art, but that's not really art. He said, my ironic imagery backfired. I was told that several women's clubs had booked group visits to see the show, but when they arrived, they were quite disgruntled and disappointed that it wasn't all about cake decorating. And the joke here is that the fellow sort of conceptual-based artists on the faculty with Art Green at Nova Scotia looked down on painting and thought of it merely as a form of surface decoration, or sort of like cake decoration. So he is saying, well, here you go. So now just sort of segueing into the Harry Who, I want to show you some examples where they are playing around with their public persona. I don't know to what extent. Of course, this is 1967, sometimes slightly earlier, sometimes slightly later, how good memories are. I am, of course, coming at it as an art historian looking back at this, so I'd love to hear more about the actual intent or how sort of just momentary some of these things were. So this is the cover of Panorama. The Chicago Daily News is sort of like, you know, magazine or whatever, where everybody is leaping up. Everybody but Jim Falconer is there. This is from the 1967 exhibition. And just to show you the kind of leap that the press was talking about, and the way that they were talking about these artists, this group of artists, as part of youth culture, to the point that they're almost denigrating them by calling them young and teasing them about being young. They're connecting them, obviously, with the Beatles. I don't know. You know, this seems to be deliberate because of the pun, the sort of saying art rocks here with excitement, with music groups and things. Well, that wasn't the intention of this group. They're certainly read that way by some of the press around them. This is a still from Hard Day's Night. And Carl says that this spread in the Harry Who comic, the first one, I think, which says, if you read it like this, and then across and down. It took me 27 years to get this cute all up in here in my Maxwell Street suit, was in response to a kind of chatter about, oh, aren't they cute, these young people who are showing their work at the Hyde Park Arts Center, is kind of deliberate response to that. And there are a lot of ways where, not only through their public persona, but obviously through the manner in which they are making their installations and the things that you take away, which aren't serious catalogs, but are actually handmade artist catalogs done because of a need for keeping under budget, that disrupt what you would expect to take away from an art exhibition or the kind of experience you would get there. So Jim has said in interviews, not only with me but other people in the past, that wallpapering and linoleum over the walls and that kind of patterning and incorporating all these different kinds of other things that are seen as part of the art or analogs to the art was a way of lampooning the white cube and the sort of way that everything seems to be presented in the same way, whether it's a medieval altarpiece or a contemporary painting in the art world at the time, and to some extent is still done. Of course, the posters, the show posters and things like that are also contributing to this kind of confusion, but also very well elaborately crafted ways of presenting a kind of group identity. And to some extent, this is something that the critics kind of get hung up on. So for instance, somebody who's sympathetic, and I would argue an insider, Whitney Halstead in 1967 writes, with all the various promotional devices and press coverage, it is possible to fail to consider the works themselves or to give them proper consideration. The announcement poster, and he's talking about, in this case, this, for 1967, the announcement poster was an outlandish, exquisite corpse, done by all 5 artists. In true doubt of spirit, their delight and perversity made it all but unreadable. Other exquisite corpses were scattered throughout the 32-page Harry Who comic book, though each artist contributed several pages, as well as designing a button for distribution at the vernissage. All of these contributions, both group and individual, demonstrate the unadulterated lampooning of nearly everything from traditional media and styles to exhibition display and exhibition catalogs. So he's writing in 1967, and that's his reaction to what he's seeing. So one of the things that happens, at least from Art Green's perspective, is that the artists start to see analogs in other kinds of worlds, including the bodybuilding world, obviously comics and other places, to the sort of the subculture of the art world, and that there's a separate language and there's separate kinds of gestures and things that insiders know about. And that's one, I think, sort of relationship between this, but also this bodybuilding idea is like the last thing you would expect to see at a fine art exhibition. The body on display, the physicality, the sort of emphasis on muscle rather than intellect, those kinds of things. There is, of course, a kind of labor and hand and intellect together united in the Harry Who's work, which is one of the hallmarks. But this kind of disruption of the tradition of the body in art and playing around with it is also something that really confuses and baffles these critics who aren't really sure how to read these. Is this funny? Is this tragic? If you sort of think about what's really happening to these bodies, which are have limbs cut off or missing or stumped, where there are things poking in and out of them. They seem to have horrible diseases. If you just sort of think about them in relation to the idea of the aesthetic of the body throughout the history of Western art, there's an incredible disruption. But there are also precedents in medieval art, in manuscript painting, in the kind of imagery of saints and things like that. So while we like to think about these things as coming out of a comics in an outrageous context, there's also this inherent seriousness that is meshed together in a seamless way, I think, in these images. And I'll just get through a few of them to get to the last part of my talk so you can kind of get a sense. And try to think back. It's hard to encountering these things with no precedent whatsoever based on the kinds of things that are being talked about in the mid-1960s as a critic, needing to come up with language to talk about it and a kind of a point of view and an anchor. And I think as you guys go on, I'm not sure, Jim and Gladys and Sue Ellen, if you start up in the ante in challenging people with actually putting poop instead of, kind of people aren't really sure whether it's poop or not. There's no question that is footstool right there. That could be probably a pool of urine, who knows? And within the comic books, playing around with the kinds of things you would expect in newspapers and comic pages. So here's one of Gladys's, where you clip this coupon to get an additional discount on artwork in the show. And I don't know that anybody actually clipped any of those things. And a kind of self-referentiality. This is one of Sue Ellen's major pieces from 66, 67. With her dancers, there's a giant sort of incredible designed outline of two dancers with lots of dancer imagery inside. And in one of her pages here, you have this dancing couple visiting the Harry Who show, dancing around, making comments about it. And on the bottom, they say, hey, I found one with a Santa Claus and a diamond ring. I wonder if it's a clue. Maybe there is no Harry Who. And then they leave saying, neither do I. I don't believe in Harry Who, neither do I. But who's coming up behind them? So the very naming of the Harry Who is a kind of convenient reaction to the reputation of a critic, Harry Boris, who is also an artist. The story is that as they were gathering to think about a name for that first show, that Carl was heard from another room saying, Harry Who? Who's this Harry? And it turned out they were talking about Harry Boris, and nobody could believe that Carl didn't know who this commentator was, who was very self-important, but also an artist. He actually cried during the course of a broadcast memorably to Art Green. And so as he was talking about some of the work. So the name has this kind of critical reaction built into it. there's a kind of narrative disruption of whether you can actually read the comics that are in there. If you can actually tell me what this narrative is, Jim or anybody, I would be surprised, which is not the point, but also is deliberately playing out what your expectations are of the legibility of comics. Because a kid is supposed to be able to read a comic book and understand what all the symbols and the messages and the gestures mean. And of course here, if you were to decode it, you'd probably need therapy. And just, Lynn reminded us of what was going on with some of the East Coast artists and their kinds of interiors. This is a Wesselmann, just to show you just how radically different these bodies are. I mean, I think we kind of tend to forget because of everything we've seen since then. We should really do a whole seminar on tutu woo woo, so I'm gonna go past that to get to this last part. But Jim can correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't this the only painting that is really a kind of deliberate reaction to Franz, talking about all the pimples and things in your... No? No? Okay. Well, then we'll just forget about it. So the ultimate sort of culmination of this kind of reaction to the art world and taking it on in a way that is not just sort of playing around with its conventions, but really attacking it, is Peter Saul. Here is Peter painting around 1972, an image of a pop artist. Of course, he's already taken on pop art in his own work and played around with it and used the imagery that some of his peers who are active in New York are using. This is Mad Ducks, and so you see the kinds of things that Mickey Mouse is doing in this, basically probably killing people with axes. A toilet running away that has actually no thoughts, ducks that are flying through the air. He gradually focuses and refines his style, as complicated as this is. The drawing style is radically different. There's no more abstract expressionist brushwork in it. This is one of his best-known Vietnam series paintings, which is horrific because it's drawing attention to atrocities that are happening in Vietnam as it is. It also has a deliberate sort of dark humor to it, so he spells that out in the text here, which is white boys torturing and raping the people of Saigon, but he wants to let you know it could have been worse. This is the high-class version. Where there is no high class whatsoever, and all the critics at the time agreed, is the series of art world portraits he does in 1972. That includes portraits of not only him and Andy Warhol in this painting that's called Boy Talk, but also of Dorothea Speyer, Alan Frumkin, Franz Scholz, and a lot of other people, including Clement Greenberg. And Saul is Saul takes on this subject because he is appalled at what's going on in the art world, but also feels persecuted to some extent and thinks that he isn't really acknowledged for doing the right kind of art. What he says is, "What I really hate about famous and much-loved art is the dignity and respect of official art appreciation. I wish art was as exciting and actually interesting as thrill movies, porn, National Enquirer, and everything else. Why people want art to be spiritually uplifting is something I could never understand. As a kid, I wanted to spend my free time in the drugstore reading magazines, not in the church praying. That's why I think I'm doing art, a favor by cheapening it and not really embarrassed to boast my pictures are the ugliest and stupidest of all. But the words ugly and stupid are matters of opinion and hard to pin down. So every once in a while, I try to have a successful art career like everyone else. Not easy to do because I really have maintained the wrong artistic direction for a long time." So he goes out of his way in 1972 to go about as wrong as he possibly can by lampooning everybody who's a mover and shaker in the art world, including Clement Greenberg, who's screwing himself here as a hermaphrodite with this stick, which is a paintbrush that says He-Man art, which is a kind of jab on Clement Greenberg talking about the sort of macho, strong pictures of abstract expressionism, and then later talks about that kind of quality in the art he'll champion after that. Saul does a double critic suicide in 1986 of Peter Schladel and Hilton Kramer. And I'll close with Roger Brown. And just mention a couple of examples of him tussling with critics that are really important as we think about all these different issues. Of course, Brown is very much engaged in politics, and he becomes embroiled in the politics of the art world. He lets some things get to him, and things that he feels like he needs to speak out against, he does. This is his illustration for an article that was on 80s art stars from Europe, including Francesco Clemente and others. This is Mr. Puff and Mr. Sneer. Mr. Sneer approves, and there are specific people that he's taking on in these. This is a study, which is for a painting that I'll show you in a minute, Imagist forcing a student into being a second-generation Imagist, which is an allusion to... well, and it's interesting that this is on the same page where he's thinking about the Challenger explosion. But anyway, this is, so it's sort of together in his mind in terms of justice and human rights issues, I think, and what the state of the world is. And so this is something that's very serious to him. Here is Le Cage aux Fall, which is what that study winds up being turned into. And this is basically three consecutive bands that are telling a story. There's text under here, too, basically about a kind of idea that there's a conspiracy in the Chicago art world that only likes Chicago quote-unquote Imagist art, and everything else can just be pushed to the margins. Nobody actually writes about it, and it's not actually Chicago art. And so that's what's getting all the attention. In fact, the School of the Art Institute is infiltrated by these Imagists, and they're teaching their students to copy them, and that's what's happening. And so it's kind of a perpetual factory for Imagist art, which then is going to be shown at Miss Mary Mean, which is actually supposed to be Phyllis Kind's gallery. So that's all what's going on here. So here's the Imagist making this guy may paint like that. It's being applauded. It's being bought by rich people in the suburbs. And then here is the art critic who really thinks that a different kind of art should be made and is really encouraging one of their protégés. And it's a potential firestorm that will happen in Chicago, alluding to the 1871 fire, and everything will go up into flames, so it won't really matter anyway. So Brown is sort of thinking about these issues, which culminates in this painting called Giotto and His Friends Getting Even, which is an elaborate, he's looking at the Arena Chapel, obviously, but is an elaborate painting, one panel, one big canvas, that basically talks about the way he thinks Franz Scholz and Alan Artner are writing art criticism in the 1960s, 70s, and beyond, which is not paying attention to what's really going on in the city, and writing about, according to Brown's text here, art that's imitating art of the East, Byzantium, which is really New York, and ignoring the homegrown thing that's happening because the true provincial doesn't look in his own backyard. That's one of the quotes here. And so it's a whole allegory about the lack of real acceptance of what Brown thinks he and his contemporaries are doing. And it sort of ends badly. And I'll just leave you with this, which is Brown's image of Alan Artner putting his head up his ass. So I'm not sure what all that amounts to, but I'd love a chance to talk about it with Lynn and everybody if we actually have time, which we might not. But anyway, thank you very much for your attention.